for that. And Paul says very clearly, the one who is single is not distracted by the things of married life, and therefore should be more given to the things of the gospel and to ministry. So while we may have to work, we do have, as single people, a fair amount of free time outside of our work hours. There are obligations we don't have in terms of family life, and we want to be productively using those for the Lord and trying to fill that time with things that serve Him and fulfill His purposes. And so that's a huge one that we need to be, continually encouraging one another in regards to. And the sort of corollary one is that sometimes for those women that are married and may or may not have children, but they are in the workplace, the flip side is that they may be really struggling with that because they feel like they don't want to be working, and they are, for a variety of reasons, still needing to work, whether that's because that's something that their husband wants them to do, whether that's because of financial situations in their family. Maybe it's a single mom who is now responsible for whatever reason to support her family and her children. And so, she's dealing with the reality that she would rather be home with her children, and she's concerned about them and them not having that opportunity, but yet she has to support them. There's all kinds of scenarios in which this could play itself out. And to go back to that grass is greener philosophy, the single person could be sitting there saying, I really want to be married and all of this, and then the married person is like, oh, this isn't so great, actually, and I don't really, I have all these struggles that I didn't have before, and I didn't have to deal with all of this. And so again, which is a good sort of caveat over all of this. A change, if you are discontent, a change in your circumstances is very unlikely to lead to contentment. Because a single person who's discontent is going to be a married person who is discontent. Because again, it really isn't the circumstances that is causing your discontentment. It's a heart issue. And so you want to train yourself to deal with that. And again, it's going to be a practice that we're dealing with our whole lives, because even as our circumstances change, there's always going to be unmet expectations. There's always going to be things that didn't turn out the way that we wanted them. There's things going to be that didn't live up to whatever we thought they would be. And so we just need to train ourselves from the very beginning, from as early as possible, to learn to battle through that towards contentment, because that's going to serve us later. And so, that is critically important. One of the specific challenges I do think that when you're a married woman in the workplace that you have is you do sort of have potentially competing sort of authority submission structures. And you need to submit to your employer, but you also need to submit to your husband. And there could be times where there could be some discrepancy between how you work that out. And so that can be a temptation and a challenge. And hopefully that's something that the husband is growing in godliness in terms of how to shepherd his wife through that in such a way and provide a covering that he really, even though he's not her boss in the workplace, he is providing a covering and a guidance and helping her through that. But men don't always understand that role, and so that can create challenges and a bit of a battle at times, and that could be a pressure that she doesn't face, or that she faces, that a single woman might not. But at the same time, a single woman might struggle with feeling like I don't have any covering or protection in the workplace. I don't know who I can go to ask those questions. And, if you don't have a godly father to seek out that kind of counsel from, that's where, godly men within the church in the right context hopefully can come alongside and help. Your elders and deacons who are shepherding you can hopefully you develop those relationships so that you do have people that you can seek that kind of counsel from. Another way that this plays itself out in terms of contentment is I think just sort of that overwhelming trying to do it all kind of thing that comes into play when you're dealing with questions of work. And our culture really has given women this message like, well, you can have it all. You can have a full-time career, and you can be married, and you can raise your kids, and you can do it all. And it's statistically proven that the more opportunities women have had sort of in the world that would supposedly make us so happy and content, we're increasingly discontent. We're increasingly overwhelmed, depressed, unhappy, just like as a culture. And I think a lot of that is because of this. There's the reality of being able to do it all versus what the world has said, or sort of this dream that the world has put out there is different. And you can't try to do everything all the time well at once. It just doesn't work that way. And so discontentment can stem from this being overwhelmed, trying to balance the responsibilities of work life and home life. And I think sometimes, too, that's where there can, hopefully this doesn't happen, and I don't necessarily see this within our body, but I think that is where sometimes almost that kind of envy can come between like married women versus single women, both ways, who are in those situations, because, you think married women are like, wow, they don't have all these other responsibilities, but at the same time, single women are trying to manage their lives without the help of a husband who can adds value of another salary and wisdom and help with finances or whatever those questions are that as single women we sometimes struggle with, thinking, well, I don't want to have to make all these decisions by myself. And so in both cases there can be real tests of time management and how to make choices about activities and what we do and what we invest ourselves and our time in. This is where really married women should seek help and counsel from their husbands in terms of managing their time. And not that he's going to manage every minute of their schedule and micromanage things, but that they together as a family need to decide, what is profitable for them to be involved in and doing, and what activities maybe they need to say no to. And really having that ability to sort of manage the schedule by even saying, you know what, I'm sorry, but my husband doesn't want me to do that right now. Kind of having that little bit of protection. And as single women, we need to find ways to seek that accountability too. And I was super convicted about this as I read that last night of what I wrote, but because I'm really bad at this. And I probably should take my own advice and let somebody say no for me sometimes. But we can easily, and I guess part of this too depends on which way we're wired. I think some of us can be easily wired to not nearly do enough and just sort of be, some of us are more prone to laziness probably, and then others of us are prone to try to do way too much. And so we need to find the right and appropriate balance. And it's not going to look the same for every person. So it's not like there's one person's life that's the model of this is how much you should be doing and what you should do. People are different in terms of their interests and capacities and schedules and all of that. But we need to be wise in determining that in our own lives, how we can be both diligent but yet not overcommit ourselves. The Lord will provide the people to do the work, and sometimes some of us who are more likely to just step up and do it all need to step back and give opportunity for other people who aren't doing enough maybe to step in and be more, take some of that time to serve. And that's true regardless of our singleness or married state. So those are good, hopefully helpful thoughts. Okay, that kind of covers the various different, some of what I identified as some of the big areas of temptation or the circumstances that can really lead us to discontentment. Questions on those before we're going to move into kind of like the heart issues and what those are, but questions on what those are, something that you're like, I really struggle with this, and you totally missed that one. Or you can think about it and we can come back to it after we go
I've run into her over the years that is not a Christian, and she has some of those same God-designed biblical desires for marriage and a child in her life. And it's interesting the people that she turns to for quote-unquote wisdom are other people in the office who have significant others, whether boyfriends or married, with or without children. And so even if I'm a Christian, she doesn't necessarily seek out that insight because, well, what do you know, because you're a single woman. And so I've found that very interesting, but those desires have become idols to her, so she's not necessarily a believer. So her response to those desires is different.
Yeah. And it's just as easy for us to make them idols as it is for a non-believer. But which is sometimes a good reminder when we see that happening in somebody else's heart, and it sometimes helps us to recognize, and then we sometimes need to look at our own heart and think, oh yeah, I'm really prone to act that same way. So how is the gospel making me different in this situation? How is the gospel helping me to respond differently? So it can be a good reminder in that sense, even as we hopefully can encourage somebody to maybe at some point the Lord will provide an opportunity for you to show her how the gospel has helped you to struggle with those same things. Right. So what's the solution? We threw out all the reasons we could be discontent. You know, if we weren't struggling with one of them, maybe now they're on our list. Hopefully not. But what's the solution? Well, Paul gives us an excellent example in the scripture. And you know, again, we've said this already, but contentment is not really an issue of changing our circumstances, but of our heart being transformed by the gospel. So I want to read again Philippians 4:11-13, which we started with. Not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with humble means, and I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. So the I can do all things is I can walk through all circumstances. I can be content. It's not just about sports games. It's always where that one gets quoted. I'm going to have the victory. I can do all things. It's actually about contentment, really, in context. But contentment really is not a virtue that's easily won. Thomas Watson, and I completely recommend this book, The Art of Divine Contentment. It's an old Puritan writing by Thomas Watson, and he exposits Philippians 4:11 primarily in this. It's like a series of sermons that he gave on this topic. And he says, the trade of sin needs not to be learned, but the art of divine contentment is not achieved without holy industry. He later states, it's a hard lesson. So we naturally sin, we're naturally discontent, as we talked about earlier, but it's only through holy industry, it's only through hard work that we can learn to be content. Like so many of the fruits of godliness, contentment is a lesson not learned outside of difficulty. Patience is never learned apart from waiting. And contentment is never truly learned apart from desires being withheld or an unfulfilled desire or an undesirable circumstance coming into our lives. We can't say that we're really content if we have everything we want. That's not contentment. That's just having everything we want. And so it's through these times of unmet expectations, it's through these times of undesirable circumstances that the Lord teaches us to be dependent on him and to find joy and contentment that is not based in those circumstances. And we've talked about the analogy of the sponge and how when our heart is squeezed by our circumstances, really it's what comes out. And that's the point of Proverbs 4:23 as well.